If you're looking at the date, it is so interesting because yesterday was a significant date, especially in South Florida. This week marks the 20-year anniversary since Hurricane Katrina devastated parts of the Gulf Coast. Katrina remains one of the deadliest and costliest natural disasters in U.S. history. It made landfall near New Orleans as a Category 3 storm, bringing storm surge levels, get this, over 25 feet high along portions of the Gulf Coast.
Let's bring in Fox Weather hurricane specialist Bryan Norcross to take a look back at this iconic and just terrifying hurricane. Bryan, good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
You know,
it is this time of year we have all these anniversaries, and it is amazing. And it happened here in South Florida too. Katrina started here. Of course, it was nothing compared to what was to come.
Yeah, I think it's one of those weeks that a lot of people take pause because there are so many. There's so many hurricanes that have hit the last week of August. And when you think about a storm like Katrina, it's not just the landfall, right? It's the whole progression of what happened. But let's start with your story and your perspective of what you went through tracking Katrina.
Yeah, I was here. I was chief meteorologist here in Miami watching it. And it had been a busy hurricane season already. Just think, we were already at the K storm at the end of August. We'd had a Category 5 in the Gulf, and it made landfall right here between Miami and Fort Lauderdale as a Category 1, 80-mile-an-hour storm, caused flooding in the southern parts of the county, of Miami-Dade County, but that was the biggest impact. And then here we are the next day, just to show you what the folks in New Orleans were thinking about and what we were thinking about in terms of what was going to happen next. This is the 26th. And it was an 85-mile-an-hour storm. It didn't really weaken much over the peninsula. Here it was over the southern peninsula. It took a little more of a southern track, went right over the National Hurricane Center than was forecast, but stayed kind of on the left side of the cone. And here we've drawn the center line just so you can see the cone was massive back then. Look at that, all the way from Tampa to almost New Orleans. So that was the next day. But by the 27th, so watch one more day here, and look how things have changed. The cone shifted dramatically. So here it is more than 2 days before landfall, and the forecast is essentially perfect, the center of the cone. Well, New Orleans, of course, we always said back then, as we say now, don't just look at the center of the cone. So the entire northern Gulf Coast was on alert. The system was intensifying and more or less on as forecast at that time, 115-mile-an-hour Category 3. All right, that's the 27th. Remember, landfall is the 29th, so we're 2 days out at this point. Here we go, one more day. This is the morning of the 28th of August, 145-mile-an-hour Category 4. It was just really coming together on the satellite. It was frightening. Imagine being up in here and seeing that. And it's actually good that it did it by that time, because that got people motivated to handle this evacuation in New Orleans, which actually turned out to be one of the best evacuations ever undertaken, in spite of the poor folks that didn't get out. Most people did, thankfully. All right, so there we are the day before. Now watch what happens the next day. Here it is just offshore. This is 4 a.m. Central Time, and we've got 175-mile-per-hour Category 5 bearing down. And just a few hours later, a couple hours later, it weakens to a Category 3. But from a storm surge standpoint, the damage was already done. It was this giant storm pushing this water in this entire Gulf Coast region here and up into here, which is where the first damage was done as the water came in to what was called the Mistrigo, or the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet Canal, into the Industrial Canal, into the lower Ninth Ward. And that's when we first heard about it. It was 8:14 on Central Time on that Monday morning. I was on CBS, actually, on television, and I glanced over and I saw the bulletin, and my colleague David Bernard was in the weather office behind me, and he was listening to WWL radio out of New Orleans, and he said, levee breach in the lower Ninth Ward Industrial Canal, and then I saw it, and I reported reported it on CBS right that second. That was the first we knew about all the failures. Then it moved up and made landfall in Mississippi, 9 a.m. Central Time. So what we've learned since is that the levee failures actually started much earlier. They were more minor, but the big flood wall collapse along the Industrial Canal, which connects Lake Pontchartrain to the north to the Mississippi River to the south, that was the triggering factor for the massive flooding. And then we had many more flood walls collapse after that. As the storm got to the north, then the winds came like this and pushed Lake Pontchartrain down into the city. And that force of that water going down those outflow canals, 3 of them on the north end of the city, that flooded the entire north end of New Orleans, which is all very low. The French Quarter, which is higher and down by the Mississippi River, south, it's kind of an upside-down city the way you think about it, but south is higher. That did not flood, and there's a very definitive line there right through New Orleans. Everything north of that was underwater. And as you'll see in our special coming up tonight, we went back and revisited these places 20 years later. The city is thriving, but many neighborhoods, many neighborhoods on the north side of the city still bear the scars of Hurricane Katrina, including the fact that some houses are sitting there that look fine from the outside, but they're uninhabitable because they're filled with mold. Nobody's lived in them since they were flooded 20 years ago. So it's a little spooky and amazing, but New Orleans is an amazing place in so many ways. Guys?
It really is. Just a quick note here that I wanted to get your perspective on. What do you think, what type of lessons do you think were learned in New Orleans post Hurricane Katrina?
Well, there are massive lessons for governance. The levee system that was in place when Katrina came along was built as a result of Hurricane Betsy that hit there in 1965, and it still wasn't finished. It had been, they dilly-dallied, and different jurisdictions had different authorities over the different parts of it, and it was uncoordinated. It was just a massive example of poor governance. That's not the case anymore. Now the people work together really well. The Army Corps of Engineers is still involved, although they don't operate the thing in the same way that they did immediately after they built it. But New Orleans is well protected in terms of having a system that won't collapse. It's not a system that won't be overtopped, so water can still come into the bowl that is New Orleans. But this is a very, very fortified system, so the pumps should be able to handle it, and it won't keep coming. What happened in Katrina was that the water started overtopping, and that was okay. That the system was designed to be overtopped, but then the walls collapsed because they weren't built right, and then the water never stopped. And so if it came in for hours, and in some cases days, until the Gulf water and the lake water settled down below whatever level those flood walls were. And of course, if they were collapsed, very often it was just open to the water for the longest time. So that's not going to happen in the future. That doesn't mean there won't be flooding, there won't be issues. It doesn't mean people shouldn't evacuate if a massive hurricane is coming to New Orleans. But it's a whole different situation. And they spent $14.5 billion to do it, but they seem to have fixed the governance so that the system can operate well going into the future.
And of course, lessons that can be translated to other metropolitan areas. Interesting perspective, Bryan. Now, we started this whole conversation with this is a week that can be a little triggering for many folks because of so many storms happening. And I'm sure for you, you probably think about Andrew.
100%. Yeah, here in South Florida, people that were here remember Andrew like it was yesterday, and it was 33 years ago. If you look on my Facebook page, you'll see so many comments from folks that went through it, and we can all picture where we were at the time that the landfall happened, where we were when we saw first what had happened. For me, it was the Monday afternoon. So August 24th was a Monday that year. And that afternoon, it took until the afternoon until we got a helicopter in the air, a live helicopter, where we could see what had happened south of downtown Miami. We had no significant communications out of south of downtown Miami. And the mayor of the city of Miami, downtown Miami, Miami is not a very big city in the vastness of Miami-Dade County. So in the city, the mayor came on early that morning and said, Miami has survived. We're going to be great. Everything is pretty good here. We'll clean up and we'll be back in business. I said, do not think because we have not heard from Homestead and Point South that things are good there. And indeed, we didn't hear because there was no communication, there was no power, there was no nothing and it took until that afternoon until we saw it actually on the helicopter, from the helicopter, that we knew that it was incredible. And until we got there, the late that night and the next day, we didn't really understand that from the helicopter. I eventually went up a couple days later. You could look as far as you could see in any direction and see nothing but devastation. It was just... I knew South Dade from the helicopter very, very well for years and years and years. I've been flying it, and you couldn't locate anything. Couldn't find anything if you were on the ground. There were no street signs. You couldn't find anything in the air because there were no landmarks. It was surreal, to say the least.
Bryan, just curious. Say, for example, that was back in 1992. If we had another hurricane, same size, same scale, same strength as Andrew, heading toward Homestead, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, do you feel like the infrastructure in the cities along the southeast coast of Florida are prepared now?
Prepared, no. Better in many ways, yes. New construction, especially since say mid-2000s, is these buildings are built like battleships. It doesn't make any difference if it's a new townhouse down in Homestead. In Homestead, the population has more than doubled, and they're building like crazy down there. That's the real population growth center in South Florida. All those buildings are built very, very strong. All those incredible high-rises, they're building 100-story buildings in downtown Miami, all built incredibly strong, the strongest in the world to high-wind events. But when you have that kind of a storm, everything at the ground is still vulnerable. You're still going to lose infrastructure, and the port of Miami and the airport and the banking center, which is in Brickell Avenue, which is very prone to high water and flooding, is still going to be devastated. And all across the county, you've got 6 million people living in the metropolitan area of Miami, Fort Lauderdale, into southern Palm Beach County. So, you can't put a Category 5 like that, and intensifying Category 5. Now in the modern time, we realize that intensifying is what made that so strong. And if you saw the pictures I sent yesterday, we don't see 2x4s going through palm trees and plywood going through palm trees in hurricanes, right? This is tornado kind of crazy things that happen. Cars flipping over in their garage. That's tornado stuff. And indeed, this storm acted like an EF5 tornado, but it was 20 miles wide when it came
massive
through
version of one.
The southern part of Miami-Dade County.
Well, I know so many people still look back and they remember your coverage and what you did for their families. So, Bryan, we're honored to have you on our team. That is Fox Weather Hurricane Specialist Bryan Norcross, looking back at Andrew and also Katrina. We'll talk to you soon, Bryan.
All right. Thanks, Britain.